On a rise in Oxfordshire, surrounded by parkland designed to look like nature perfected, stands a palace that was never meant to be a home. This is the dark story of Blenheim Palace. At first glance, the building appears to celebrate victory, a monument raised in stone to honour Britain's greatest general of his age. The facade stretches outward like outstretched arms, columns and towers announcing ambition on a scale that rivals royal residences. But look closer, and another story emerges. Behind those walls, generations of dukes have struggled against debts that never quite disappeared, selling paintings, selling land, selling their daughters into marriages that resembled contracts more than love. Here, American fortunes were exchanged for English titles, and women walked down aisles knowing they were purchasing something their money alone could never buy. The servants who kept this machine running lived in corridors visitors never saw, their labour making possible the illusion of effortless grandeur. And even now, in an age when the old aristocracy clings to relevance through tourism and television, Blenheim Palace remains a monument to something more complicated than triumph. It is a monument to the price of victory, to the weight of inheritance, and to the question that echoes through every gilded room. Who actually paid for all of this? And what did it cost them? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. The story begins not with a house, but with a battle. On a summer morning in 1704, along the banks of the Danube in what is now Bavaria, two armies collided in a clash that would reshape the map of Europe. The War of the Spanish Succession had been grinding on for years, a sprawling conflict over who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire after the death of its childless king. France, under Louis XIV, stood poised to dominate the continent, its armies sweeping across Europe, its ambitions seemingly unstoppable. Against this tide stood a coalition of nations, and at the head of the Allied forces rode John Churchill, an English general of middle years and extraordinary tactical gifts. The Battle of Blenheim, as the English would name it, lasted a single bloody day. By nightfall, the French army was shattered. Thousands lay dead in the fields and floating in the river. An entire French marshal had been captured. The myth of French invincibility, carefully cultivated across decades, was broken in hours. News of the victory reached London and set the city alight with celebration. Church bells rang, bonfires blazed in the streets. Queen Anne, who had appointed Churchill to his command, found herself presiding over a triumph that secured her throne and her nation's place among the great powers. The question of how to reward such a victory occupied the minds of politicians and courtiers for months. Land grants were common enough for military heroes, but this felt different. Churchill had not merely won a battle, he had changed the balance of power across Europe. Anne decided that the reward must match the achievement. She would give Churchill an estate, but not merely an estate. She would build him a palace, funded by the Crown, designed by the finest architects available, raised on a scale that announced to the world what British arms could accomplish. The gift was meant to be generous. It would become, over the following centuries, a burden so heavy that it nearly crushed the family meant to inherit it. The site chosen was Woodstock in Oxfordshire, land that had once held a royal manor and hunting lodge. The ruins of the old medieval buildings still dotted the grounds when surveyors arrived to mark out the new palace. Anne granted Churchill the land in perpetuity and promised that Parliament would fund the construction. The project would be called Blenheim, after the battle that had earned it, and it would stand forever as testimony to the general's service to the crown. The man chosen to design this monument was Sir John Vanbrugh, a figure unlike any architect before or since in English history. Vanbrugh had not trained in architecture. He had begun his career as a soldier, then turned to writing comedies for the London stage, achieving considerable success with sharp, witty plays that mocked the pretensions of society. Somewhere in those years he had developed a passion for building, and despite having no formal education in the craft, he had talked his way into major commissions through charm, connections, and an unshakable confidence in his own vision. Vanbrugh saw architecture as theatre. Buildings were not merely shelters or status symbols. They were stages for the drama of life, and their forms should stir emotion, provoke wonder, and make visible the power of those who commissioned them. When he received the commission for Blenheim, he grasped immediately that this was not meant to be a comfortable country house. It was meant to be a statement, a war memorial in domestic form, a palace that would overwhelm visitors with its scale and leave no doubt about the greatness of the man who dwelt within. His design was English Baroque at its most muscular. The main block rose in heavy stone masses, flanked by service courts and stable courts that extended the facade to an almost absurd width. Towers and colonnades punctuated the composition. Classical columns supported porticos designed to dwarf anyone who approached. The roofline bristled with carved trophies, stone representations of cannons and drums, and military standards captured from the French. Every element announced victory, power, permanence. Vanbrugh cared little for domestic comfort. Rooms were vast and often impractical. Corridors stretched endlessly. Windows were placed for external effect rather than internal light. The Duchess of Marlborough, Sarah Churchill, who involved herself deeply in the project, complained bitterly that the house was designed for show rather than living. She was correct, and that was precisely the point. Blenheim was not built to shelter a family. It was built to commemorate a moment in history when one man's battlefield decisions altered the fate of nations. Construction began in 1705 with an army of workers descending on the Oxfordshire countryside. The scale of the operation rivaled the military campaigns Churchill himself had commanded. Stonemasons arrived from across England and from the continent, bringing techniques refined over generations on cathedrals and royal palaces. Quarries were opened to supply the pale golden limestone that would give Blenheim its distinctive colour, stone that caught the afternoon light and seemed to glow against the English sky. Carpenters set up workshops on site, shaping the oak and elm that would frame roofs and floors. Blacksmiths forged the ironwork for gates and railings. Plasterers prepared to cover interior walls with ornamental designs. Glaziers readied the glass that would fill hundreds of windows. The workforce at peak construction numbered in the hundreds, a small town of labourers housed in temporary shelters scattered across the grounds, eating together in makeshift dining halls, sleeping in dormitories thrown up for the purpose. The conditions were punishing. English weather cared nothing for construction schedules. Rain turned the site to mud that swallowed carts and sucked at boots. Winter cold cracked fresh mortar and forced work to slow or stop entirely. Summer heat brought dust and flies. The men worked long days for wages that varied by skill. Master masons earned respectable pay, enough to support families and perhaps set aside savings for old age. Common labourers earned far less, their bodies used up in the endless hauling of stone and timber and rubble. Injuries were common: falls from scaffolding, crushed fingers and broken limbs, the occasional death when a block slipped or a scaffold collapsed. No comprehensive records survive of how many men were hurt or killed building Blenheim Palace, but the silence in the archives tells its own story. These were disposable lives in the eyes of those who commissioned the work. What mattered was the building rising stone by stone, not the bodies that made that rise possible. The financial arrangements that funded this work were troubled from the beginning. Queen Anne had promised that Parliament would pay, but Parliament had never formally committed the necessary funds. Money came in irregular bursts, often late, frequently insufficient. Vanbrugh and the contractors extended credit, trusting that the Crown would eventually honour its obligations. Workers went unpaid for months at a time. Suppliers threatened to halt deliveries. The entire project lurched from crisis to crisis, sustained by faith that a grateful nation would not abandon its hero. That faith proved misplaced. Political winds shifted. Anne's government fell and rose and fell again. The Whigs who supported Churchill gave way to Tories who resented him. Sarah Churchill, whose sharp tongue and sharper temper had made her enemies across London society, lost the Queen's favour in a spectacular public breach. By 1712, with the palace still unfinished, Crown funding ceased entirely. The bills kept arriving, the workers kept demanding payment, and the Churchills found themselves personally responsible for completing a monument they had never asked to fund from their own pockets. John Churchill himself had accumulated wealth through his military career and through careful investment. He was not poor by any measure, but the scale of Blenheim's costs exceeded anything he had anticipated. Estimates suggest that completing the palace required something approaching £300,000, an almost incomprehensible sum in early 18th century terms, enough to purchase dozens of ordinary country estates with change left over. Churchill paid and kept paying, watching his fortune drain into foundations and walls and ornamental plasterwork. When he died in 1722, the palace remained unfinished. His widow Sarah, now Dowager Duchess, took over the project with characteristic determination. She dismissed Vanbrugh, with whom she had clashed for years, and hired other architects to complete the work according to simplified designs. The result was a palace that bore Vanbrugh's stamp on its exterior but showed Sarah's economizing hand in many interior spaces that never received the elaboration the original plans had promised. Sarah lived on at Blenheim for decades, rattling through rooms designed for state entertaining, watching her husband's military reputation fade in public memory as new wars produced new heroes. The palace she had fought to complete became a kind of prison, a monument to a marriage, and a moment that receded further into the past with each passing year. She outlived most of her children and many of her grandchildren. The title passed sideways through the family, landing eventually on relatives who had never known John Churchill personally, who inherited not his memories, but only his house and his debts. By the middle of the 18th century, the Dukes of Marlborough were already struggling to maintain what they had received. The pattern that would define the family for the next 200 years had been established. Inherit a palace, struggle to pay for it, sell what can be sold. Hope the next generation finds a solution. The monument to victory had become a monument to financial burden, and the burden would only grow heavier as centuries passed. The grounds that surrounded the palace told their own story of ambition and transformation. Vanbrugh had laid out formal gardens in the Baroque style, geometric patterns of hedges and paths that echoed the military precision of parade grounds. The land fell away from the house toward a small river called the Gleim, which had been dammed to create a series of ornamental canals and pools. The effect was impressive but somewhat stiff. Nature forced into shapes that announced human dominance. All of this would be swept away in the 1760s when the 4th Duke of Marlborough hired Lancelot Brown, the landscape designer known universally as Capability Brown, to remake the grounds according to the new fashion for naturalistic landscapes. Brown was the most sought-after garden designer in England. He had transformed dozens of estates, replacing formal gardens with rolling lawns, serpentine lakes, and carefully placed clumps of trees that created an illusion of idealized nature. His method was to examine a property and declare that it had capability for improvement, hence his nickname. At Blenheim, he found capability on a grand scale. Brown's transformation took years and consumed enormous resources. He flooded the valley of the Glyme to create a lake that stretched for nearly a mile, drowning Vanbrugh's formal canals and pools beneath waters that appeared to have existed since time began. He planted thousands of trees in patterns calculated to mature over decades into the perfect English parkland. He shaped the land itself, moving earth to create gentle rises and subtle valleys that would frame views and direct the eye toward carefully selected focal points. The grand bridge that Vanbrugh had designed to cross the original canal now spanned the new lake, its massive stone arches reflected in waters deep enough to swallow several stories of structure below the waterline. The buried foundations of Vanbrugh's ornamental work lay invisible beneath the surface, a submerged monument to an earlier vision of how nature should serve architecture. Brown's lake and parkland remain today, and visitors walking the grounds rarely pause to consider how much labour went into creating this apparently natural scene. The workers who built Brown's landscape were different from those who had raised the palace walls, but their labours were no less demanding. Estate workers and hired gangs spent years moving soil, digging channels, planting saplings, and shaping the land according to Brown's vision. The lake alone required the construction of massive earthen dams and the excavation of hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of earth. Men worked with shovels and barrows, with horse-drawn carts and simple wooden tools, transforming the Oxfordshire countryside through sheer physical effort. When the work was done, the estate employed gamekeepers and gardeners to maintain what had been created, trimming hedges, managing woodland, keeping paths clear and views unobstructed. This labour force became permanent, generation following generation in service to the estate, their cottages clustered in the village of Woodstock or scattered across the park in dwellings provided by the Duke. Their names appear occasionally in estate records, usually when wages were paid or disputes arose, but their individual stories have largely vanished. What remains is the landscape they created, now mature and magnificent, looking as if it has always existed. Inside the palace, another workforce kept the machinery of aristocratic life running. The household at its peak employed dozens of servants, from the butler who managed the male staff and presided over formal occasions, down to the kitchen maids who scrubbed pots and floors from before dawn until long after dark. The hierarchy was strict and carefully observed. Upper servants, the butler, housekeeper, cook, and lady's maid enjoyed private rooms, regular meals at their own table, and a degree of respect from the family. Lower servants slept in shared dormitories, ate what was left after their betters had finished, and could be dismissed without notice for any infraction. The work was unending. Fires needed lighting before the family woke. Meals appeared at precise hours, regardless of how long preparation required. Beds were made, chamber pots emptied, clothes brushed and pressed, silver polished, brass buffed, floors swept, windows cleaned. Every surface in a house of this size accumulated dust and demanded attention. The servants who performed this work were largely invisible to the guests who passed through Blenheim's staterooms. That invisibility was intentional. The whole point of service was to maintain an illusion of effortless abundance, a world in which fires always burned, meals always appeared, and dirt never accumulated because unseen hands prevented it. The contrast between the public rooms and the servants' quarters was stark. Visitors entering through the Great Hall encountered spaces designed to overwhelm. Ceilings painted with allegorical scenes of Churchill's victories. Walls hung with tapestries depicting battle after battle. Marble columns and gilded mouldings catching the light from tall windows. The long library, one of the finest rooms in any English country house, stretched for nearly 180 feet, its walls lined with thousands of volumes and its ceiling decorated with paintings celebrating the written word. The state rooms, designed for entertaining royalty and impressing foreign ambassadors, displayed collections of porcelain and silver, portraits of ancestors, and furniture crafted by the finest makers of successive centuries. Every inch announced wealth, taste, and power stretching back across generations. Behind the green baize doors that separated the family's world from the servants, the atmosphere changed entirely. Corridors were narrow and plain. Staircases were steep and unlit. The servants' hall, where meals were taken, was functional at best. Bedrooms were cramped and cold, heated only by whatever warmth rose from the kitchens below. The message was clear. Some lives were meant for display. Others were meant to serve. The financial strain that had shadowed Blenheim from its earliest years intensified across the 19th century. Agricultural rents, which had long provided the foundation of aristocratic wealth in England, began to decline as cheap grain from the American prairies flooded British markets. Land that had generated reliable income for generations suddenly produced less and less. The Marlborough dukes found themselves caught between the vast expenses of maintaining their palace and the shrinking revenues available to meet those costs. Successive generations sold what they could. Paintings went to dealers and collectors. Rare books left the library. Parcels of land were carved off and disposed of. The family silver, accumulated across centuries, was melted down or auctioned. Each sale bought time but solved nothing permanently. The palace remained, demanding fuel and maintenance and staff, consuming whatever resources the family could raise. The solution that saved Blenheim, at least temporarily, came from an unexpected source. By the late 19th century, American industrial fortunes had created a new class of fabulously wealthy families whose daughters found their social ambitions blocked by the rigid hierarchies of New York and Boston society. Old money looked down on new. Families whose wealth came from railroads, mining, or manufacturing, however vast that wealth might be, remained excluded from the inner circles of American aristocracy. A title offered a way around this barrier. A duchess, regardless of how her family had earned its fortune, commanded respect that mere millions could never purchase. And the English aristocracy, desperate for cash, discovered that it possessed something American money could not otherwise buy. The 8th Duke of Marlborough was a man of expensive tastes and empty pockets. His predecessor had already sold much of the family's art collection. The estate was encumbered with debts. The palace itself required urgent repairs that there was no money to fund. Into this situation stepped Consuelo Vanderbilt, great-granddaughter of the Commodore, whose transportation empire had produced one of the largest fortunes in American history. Consuelo was 18 years old, beautiful, cultured, and deeply unhappy about the fate her mother had arranged for her. Alva Vanderbilt, a woman of formidable will and social ambition, had determined that her daughter would become a duchess. The young woman's own preferences, which ran toward a different suitor entirely, were irrelevant. The engagement was announced. The wedding took place in 1895 at St. Thomas Church in New York, an event so lavish and so public that newspapers across America covered every detail. The marriage contract that accompanied this union was as carefully negotiated as any business deal. The Vanderbilts agreed to settle $2.5 million on the Duke, with additional funds to follow. In exchange, Consuelo received a title, a palace, and a position near the top of English society. What she did not receive was happiness. Her own account of the wedding, written years later, described how she wept through the ceremony, how her mother had threatened and pressured her into compliance, how the entire event felt less like a marriage than a transaction. The Duke, for his part, showed little interest in his young wife beyond the money she brought. Their relationship was cold from the start and deteriorated steadily. They produced 2 sons, the necessary heirs to continue the Marlborough line, and then effectively separated, maintaining appearances while living largely apart. The Vanderbilt money transformed Blenheim. Roofs were repaired, rooms were redecorated. Modern conveniences, electric lighting, improved heating, and better plumbing were installed throughout the palace. The estate grounds received attention they had lacked for years. For a brief moment, the palace sparkled again, restored by American dollars to something approaching its original grandeur. But the pattern reasserted itself within a generation. Expenses outpaced income. Maintenance demands never ceased. The money that had seemed so vast proved finite when measured against the bottomless needs of a house this size. Consuelo eventually obtained an annulment and remarried, escaping the palace that had been her gilded prison. The title passed to her elder son, and a new duke inherited the old problem. How to keep Blenheim alive when keeping it alive cost more than any reasonable fortune could sustain. The 20th century brought new challenges and new adaptations. Death duties, the inheritance taxes imposed on estates when they passed from one generation to the next, struck the aristocracy with devastating force. Families that had survived for centuries found their fortunes halved or worse with each succession. Land sales accelerated. Great houses across England were demolished when their owners could no longer afford to maintain them. Blenheim survived, but only through increasingly creative measures. The 9th Duke of Marlborough opened the palace to paying visitors, an admission of financial need that would have appalled his ancestors. The grounds became a destination for tourists who paid for the privilege of walking where dukes had once walked alone. Events and exhibitions generated additional revenue. The estate diversified into commercial ventures that had nothing to do with the aristocratic life the palace was built to contain. This pattern has continued and intensified into the present day. Blenheim Palace now operates as a business as much as a residence, its survival dependent on visitor numbers, event bookings, and the constant marketing of its history and architecture. The current Duke, the 12th to hold the title, has navigated the complexities of maintaining a World Heritage Site while also trying to preserve something of private family life within its walls. The challenges are immense. The palace requires continuous conservation work, each project consuming resources that must be generated through commercial activity. The grounds demand armies of gardeners and maintenance staff. The administrative apparatus needed to run a major tourist attraction employs far more people than the old aristocratic household ever did, though their work is different in nature and organisation. Recent years have brought controversy alongside continuity. The current Duke has faced scrutiny over his management of the estate, over development proposals that critics argued would damage the historic landscape, and over the perennial tension between commercial exploitation and heritage preservation. Family disputes have occasionally spilled into public view. The private disagreements of a dynasty played out in newspaper headlines and social media commentary. The dukedom itself has become a kind of performance, the current holder expected to embody aristocratic tradition while also functioning as a modern businessman, heritage manager, and public figure. Whether this combination is sustainable, whether the Marlborough title can continue to mean anything in a world so different from the one that created it, remains an open question. The palace itself continues to exert its strange power over all who enter. Visitors arriving through the main gate still experience something of what Vanbrugh intended. The approach reveals the building gradually, its scale becoming apparent only as the distance closes. The Great Court opens before the main facade, columns and carved trophies arranged to impress and intimidate. Inside, the state rooms retain their power to overwhelm, the sheer volume of space and the weight of accumulated history pressing down on anyone who walks through them. The long library still stretches toward its distant ends. The tapestries still depict Churchill's victories. The chapel where the first Duke lies buried still whispers of mortality and ambition. 3 centuries of continuous occupation have layered the building with memories, objects, and stories that no guidebook can fully convey. But look behind the public rooms and you find the infrastructure that makes this survival possible. Workshops where conservators repair textiles and furniture, offices where administrators manage visitor services and marketing campaigns, storage rooms holding objects not currently on display, the modern machinery of heritage preservation, invisible to most visitors but absolutely essential to the palace's continued existence, and beyond the estate's boundaries, the wider economy that Blenheim both supports and depends upon. Hotels and restaurants in Woodstock serving visitors who come to see the palace. Tour operators including Blenheim on itineraries that bring coachloads of tourists from around the world. The heritage industry that has grown up around such properties, employing thousands across the country in work that did not exist when the palace was built and could not have been imagined by those who built it. The workers who maintain Blenheim today are different from the servants who once lived within its walls, but their labour is no less essential. Gardeners still tend the grounds, though their tools are powered and their training is professional. Cleaners still move through the staterooms, though they follow conservation protocols rather than traditional housekeeping methods. Guides lead tours through spaces once reserved for private entertaining. Security staff monitor crowds and protect collections worth millions. The army of workers has changed in character, but not in necessity. Without their daily effort, the palace would quickly deteriorate, its fabrics fading, its stonework crumbling, its gardens reverting to wilderness. The building survives because people continue to labour within and around it, their work as invisible to most visitors as the work of servants ever was. The story of Blenheim Palace contains lessons that reach beyond its walls. It is a story about the relationship between military victory and material reward, about how nations choose to honour those who serve them, and how those honours can become burdens for future generations. It is a story about the economics of grandeur, about how buildings designed to display wealth can consume wealth faster than any fortune can regenerate. It is a story about class and labour, about the invisible hands that maintain visible splendor, and about the stark differences between lives spent in service and lives spent in luxury. It is a story about adaptation and survival, about how institutions change their purposes to meet changing circumstances, and how what begins as a private residence can become a public heritage site without losing its essential character. The palace that John Churchill never asked to be built, that nearly bankrupted his descendants, that swallowed an American heiress's fortune and still demanded more, that opened its doors to tourists and turned itself into a business to survive, that now struggles with the challenges of the 21st century while carrying the weight of 300 years of history, that palace still stands on its Oxfordshire hilltop. The lake still reflects the bridge. The trees that Capability Brown planted have matured into the parkland he imagined. The tapestries still hang in the staterooms, their colours faded, but their scenes still readable. The chapel still holds the first Duke's remains beneath its Baroque ceiling. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors pass through, adding their footsteps to the wear on the floors, their breath to the humidity that conservators struggle to control, their admission fees to the revenue that keeps the whole operation running for another season. And the questions that have haunted this place from the beginning remain unanswered. What does it mean to build a monument to military victory? Who should pay for such monuments, and for how long? What obligations do inheritors have to properties they did not create and may not want? How do you preserve something that was never designed to be preserved, that was meant for a world that no longer exists? Can beauty justify the costs it imposes on those who must maintain it? The palace offers no answers, only the weight of its own history, the evidence of 3 centuries of struggle and adaptation written in its stones and collections and landscapes. It stands as it has always stood, magnificent and demanding, a dream made solid that became a burden passed from generation to generation. The current moment finds Blenheim at another crossroads. The heritage sector faces pressures from changing visitor expectations, from climate change affecting historic buildings and landscapes, from economic uncertainty that makes discretionary spending on tourism vulnerable. The costs of maintaining a building of this scale continue to rise, while the traditional income sources that once supported aristocratic life have long since disappeared. The family that holds the title must navigate between commercial necessity and heritage responsibility, between private interest and public accountability. Critics question decisions about development and management. Supporters argue that without commercial activity, the palace would not survive at all. The debate continues as it has continued in various forms for 300 years. Perhaps the most honest assessment of Blenheim Palace is simply this: it is a building that should not exist. It was too large from the beginning, too expensive, too impractical for any purpose except display. The funding that was supposed to pay for it evaporated before the work was done. The family that inherited it has struggled ever since to meet obligations they did not choose and could never fully discharge. And yet here it stands, against all reasonable expectation, surviving through adaptation after adaptation, its purpose transformed beyond recognition while its fabric remains substantially intact. The palace that was meant to celebrate victory has become a monument to endurance, to the stubborn refusal of beautiful things to disappear simply because maintaining them makes no economic sense. The workers who built it are long dead, their names lost to history, their labour preserved only in the stones they cut and set. The American heiress who paid for its restoration lies buried far from its grounds, her unhappy years within its walls, a chapter she closed and rarely revisited. The servants who once kept its fires burning and its silver polished have been replaced by employees with different titles and different contracts, but the work of maintenance continues as it always has. The dukes who inherited the title have each found their own accommodations with the burden, selling what they could sell, adapting what could be adapted, opening doors that were once firmly closed. Their struggles have been private and public in turns, the intimate difficulties of keeping a family and an estate together, occasionally erupting into headlines before subsiding again into the routine challenges of heritage management. What does Blenheim Palace mean now, 3 centuries after its cornerstone was laid? It means different things to different visitors. For some, it is simply a beautiful building in a beautiful landscape, worth an afternoon's exploration and a handful of photographs. For others, it is a connection to history, to the wars and politics and social structures of earlier centuries made visible in stone and tapestry. For historians, it is a primary source, a repository of documents and objects, and built evidence about how the English aristocracy lived and how that way of living changed over time. For conservators, it is a patient, a collection of materials and structures requiring constant diagnosis and treatment. For the family that still calls it home, it is all of these things and something more personal, something that cannot be fully captured in guidebooks or academic studies. And for those who look most closely, who trace the history from battlefield to building site to struggling estate to tourist attraction, Blenheim Palace is a warning and an inspiration in equal measure. A warning about the costs of grandeur, about how monuments consume the resources of those who must maintain them, about how victory in one generation can become burden in the next. And an inspiration about adaptation, about how institutions can transform their purposes while preserving their essential character, about how buildings designed for one world can find new roles in worlds their creators never imagined. The palace has survived because people continued to work within it and care for it, because visitors continue to find it worth seeing, because the marketplace found ways to sustain what public funding abandoned 3 centuries ago. The sun sets over the Oxfordshire hills as it has set for millennia, and the pale stone of the palace catches the evening light as Vanbrugh intended it should. The lake reflects the sky, the trees stand in their calculated, naturalistic arrangements. The bridge spans the water as it has spanned it for 300 years. Inside, the cleaning crews are finishing their rounds. The security systems are activating. The building is settling into its nighttime quiet. Tomorrow the gates will open again. The visitors will arrive again. The endless work of maintenance and presentation and commercial operation will resume again. The palace will perform its role as heritage site and tourist attraction, and the small army of workers who make that performance possible will go about their tasks with varying degrees of enthusiasm and expertise. Somewhere in the private apartments, the current Duke and his family will live whatever version of normal life is possible within such extraordinary walls. They will deal with the paperwork and decisions and negotiations that come with managing an estate of this complexity. They will balance the demands of preservation against the requirements of financial sustainability. They will represent the continuity of a title that has passed from father to son, and sometimes sideways through collateral lines, for more than 3 centuries. They will carry the weight of history that settles on the shoulders of anyone who inherits such a place, the knowledge that they are stewards rather than owners, that the palace will outlast them as it has outlasted all the dukes who came before. The first duke built this place, or rather, had it built by the labour of hundreds of workers whose names history did not bother to record. He paid for much of it from his own pocket when the Crown funding he had been promised failed to materialise. He walked through its half-finished rooms in his final years, watching his fortune drain into walls and ceilings and ornamental plasterwork. He died before the work was complete. His widow finished what he had started, then spent decades living alone in rooms designed for entertaining on a scale she no longer had the heart to attempt. The pattern was set from the beginning. Build something too large to sustain, struggle to maintain it, pass the struggle to the next generation. That pattern has never broken. Each successor has found their own way of coping with the inheritance, their own compromises between preservation and survival. Some married money, some sold treasures, some opened doors. All of them, in one way or another, admitted that the palace was too much for any single family to bear alone, that its survival required resources beyond what any private fortune could provide. The admission has taken different forms in different eras, but the underlying reality has remained constant. Blenheim Palace costs more to maintain than it can ever generate from its own resources. Its survival depends on bringing in money from outside, whether that money comes from American heiresses or paying visitors or event bookings or commercial partnerships. The question for the future is whether these adaptations will prove sufficient. The heritage sector faces challenges that previous generations did not anticipate. Climate change threatens historic buildings and landscapes in ways that are only beginning to be understood. Economic instability makes tourist spending unpredictable. Changing demographics and changing tastes may shift visitor numbers in directions no one can forecast. The comfortable assumptions of the late 20th century that heritage tourism would continue to grow and that sufficient revenue could always be found no longer seem quite so certain. The palace will require continued adaptation, continued creativity, continued willingness to transform its operations to meet changing circumstances. And yet, for all the uncertainty, Blenheim Palace has one advantage that many heritage properties lack. It is spectacular. The sheer scale and ambition of Vanbrugh's design, the beauty of Brown's landscape, the accumulated weight of 3 centuries of history visible in every room and corridor, these remain powerful draws in any era. People want to see extraordinary things. They want to walk through spaces that are larger than anything they encounter in ordinary life, to touch history in physical form, to experience beauty that was created before they were born and will endure after they are gone. Blenheim offers all of this. The challenge is to make the offering sustainable, to find the balance between commercial necessity and conservation responsibility, between welcoming visitors and protecting the building that visitors come to see. The palace at sunset, golden light on golden stone, lake and bridge and parkland stretching toward the horizon. This is the image that appears on postcards and websites, in travel guides and social media feeds. It is beautiful and it is true as far as it goes, but it is not the whole truth. Behind that image lie centuries of struggle, of workers labouring under dangerous conditions, of servants living in cramped quarters behind the green baize door, of unhappy brides walking down aisles toward marriages they did not choose, of dukes selling their ancestors' treasures to keep the roof from leaking, of a building that was designed to celebrate victory and became instead a monument to the endless costs of maintaining grandeur. The beauty is real. the cost is real. And the question of who pays that cost, of whose labour and whose money and whose sacrifice sustains such places, that question remains as urgent now as it was when the first stone was laid on an Oxfordshire hilltop 300 years ago. If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments which historic house we should explore next. The Breakers in Newport, Hearst Castle in California, Highclere, the real Downton Abbey, or perhaps something unexpected, a forgotten mansion with a story waiting to be told. These places are not merely buildings, they are chapters in history, built by real people, paid for with real costs, preserved through real struggle. Every mansion has its shadows, every dream has its price.